Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of 5 Facts. I'm Tony Southcott, and today we're here to talk about Night of the Living Dead. This is a 1968 horror movie from George Romero, and it is the originator of the modern zombie. Even though the term had been used in the past in movies like White Zombie and many others, this was the first time that we got to see the quintessential modern zombie, in which we basically have a rotting, shambling corpse going after the flesh of others. Anyway, let's get to the facts. Fact number 1. The main character, Ben, changed a lot after casting. Originally, Ben was supposed to be a crude, angry, but resourceful truck driver. Actor Duane Jones did so well with his audition that they decided to actually impart some of the characteristics of him onto this character. He was very studious, he was very academic, he was very kind of self-reliant and serious, and they decided that it would work better if they just kept him like that. They did allow a little bit of the anger to pop through, such as whenever he beats up the other guy in the house, and just a lot of other little moments where it kind of peaks out, but he is in a very stressful life and death situation. Many of the cast saw him as kind of a tortured soul, feeling like he never got the credit he deserved for how good of an actor he was. A lot of this was happening right in the middle of the civil rights movement, and basically to be put on screen and all this during the middle of one of the most tense times in American history would definitely lead to some tension, especially whenever you've got a white woman trapped in a house with a black man. There are a lot of people who say that this movie was a social commentary on racism, and I can see why you would draw those conclusions, but Romero himself said that that wasn't the intention of the film. Romero lamented that he didn't take this scene out later, feeling that it was kind of hip to leave it in at the time, and it was serious, and it was just a different thing that he wanted in there, and in the end he felt that it was just not as good as he thought it was. Fact number 2. A lot of the lore behind these zombies was made up on the spot. S. William Hinsman was the first zombie we see in the cemetery, and he is based off of the stiff gait of Boris Karloff from the movie The Walking Dead, which is a 1936 one, not the TV show on AMC. As a side note, some of the groans that happened in this fight were actually real because he got kicked in the nuts while they were wrestling around in the cemetery. Romero and some of the other writers were wondering what is the worst possible thing that a zombie could do, and they ended up concluding that cannibalism was pretty much the highest. Killing somebody isn't enough, like just doing random things to the body isn't enough, but actually consuming them was the biggest thing that these kind of slavish creatures could do to a person. Interestingly enough, it was originally going to be a movie about aliens. The movie was going to be called Night of the Flesh Eaters, and basically it was either going to be people in suits, or it was going to be people infected by an alien virus, which would have allowed them to kind of look like these zombies anyway. It doesn't surprise me that they had plans like this, especially with something coming from another world, and I could easily have seen that working, but I think we got a much more iconic version with just undead cannibals. Fact number 3. The effect on the American public was huge. Due to the extreme graphic violence on the screen, people reacted and tried to get the film censored, kicked out of theaters, just all sorts of things. It's the same thing that happens anytime one of these movies shows up. Psycho, we even did a Christmas slasher one, Silent Night, a while back, things like that. And people just react so negatively to it. This was made worse because at the time, most horror was considered like The Fly or House on Haunted Hill, where it had moments that were scary, but it was still a little bit slapstick, not the best acting. It was a little bit surreal, and that's why it was more directed towards sort of a childlike audience. Maybe not children, but more like junior high level and everything. It was like the monster movies at the time. So whenever they actually amped up this violence, that's the audience that went to go see it. Reader's Digest reacted by saying that they were worried this was going to start a whole new rash of cannibalism among young people. Roger Ebert claimed that kids were going to be completely traumatized by this movie. This was actually one of the last films that ever got released without a rating, because a month after release, they created the MPAA in order to rate movies so that parents would have some idea of what they were getting their kids into. This one was released early October, and that went into effect on November 1st, 1968. Honestly, whenever you see stuff like this, I think it helps the commercial viability of a movie anytime somebody tries to get it banned. This movie cost a little over $100,000 to make and made more than 230 times that in worldwide sales. The thing that sucks about that is that George Romero, because of some disputes with the distributor, didn't actually see much of the money from this. Fact number 4. What the actors were eating in some of the scenes with the zombies were pretty gross. Instead of human flesh, the zombie actors were actually eating roast ham covered in chocolate sauce. Many of the crew quipped that they didn't really need makeup for these scenes because the actors were getting so sick from the really weird mix. To me, this is also the part of the film where it really ramps up the grotesqueness. Things keep going wrong for the main characters, and you start to feel that hopelessness start to seep in. You see how these characters are reacting in these horrible situations, and it's just getting more intense, more intense, and more intense. And that's probably the best start of the, kickoff to the ending of this movie. I've really, really enjoyed this part, and it holds up pretty well. As a side note, they used that same chocolate sauce in the scene where she's stabbing her mom with the trowel. And that's just basically on loop spraying a bunch of the chocolate sauce all over the walls. Fact number 5, popcorn facts. Whenever I can't find a big juicy fact for fact number 5, we end up tossing 5 more out there, so it's more of a 10 facts today. Anyway, let's get this thing started. Makeup for the movie was done by Marilyn Eastman after Tom Savini withdrew from the project. He actually had to go to Vietnam to be a war photographer at the time, so he went to do his duty, and Marilyn Eastman ended up filling in. She didn't worry about putting on huge prosthetics for most of the zombies. She just looked at their faces, found prominent features, and really tried to make those stand out so that it would give more of a gaunt, undead look. And I think it was pretty effective, although a lot of these guys don't really look like what we would consider zombies. They're still pretty fresh. But it also is the beginning of this event, so who knows what they would have looked like in a few months. The house used for the film was actually loaned by a local man in Pennsylvania to the filmmakers, and because he was intending to destroy it, they were allowed to do as much damage to the house as they wanted. Probably the most eaten corpse in the entire film is one that George Romero actually built himself. He used ping pong balls for the eyes, clay for the skull, and basically a bunch of other things to try to make it look as authentic as possible. Another odd fact is that the term zombie is never used here, despite it actually becoming the common term in later movies. This was just something where they referred to them as those things. It's kind of like the Walking Dead show, where they're shamblers. They're anything but zombies. Last fact on here, another title of the film was going to be Night of Anubis, because Anubis was the Egyptian death god. He was also the god of mummification, death, embalming, all sorts of other things related to this, and he felt that title really would fit. But after talking to a lot of people, none of them knew who Anubis was, and he decided to go with something a little bit more known. There's so much to say about this movie. As a horror fan, you can rarely find a singular film that changed cinema so much. It was a movie with teeth that really brought us out of the era of bad monsters from the 50s, that made horror an actual serious thing. Without this movie, you wouldn't have all the zombie shows that are out there. You wouldn't have Alien. You wouldn't have so many powerful movies that exist in the horror genre. This movie made all of this possible. First off, because it was such a commercial success. Second off, because it just resonated with people. People wanted a more serious, terrifying story. Previous to this, you had Psycho from Alfred Hitchcock and a few other movies, but nothing that really kind of pounded in the monster genre. This movie locked down the rules of modern zombieism, and people were able to just expand on it and build their worlds from here. George Romero would do more zombies things in the same world. Zack Snyder, Danny Boyle, you could list 100 different directors if you're talking about zombie movies. Even the Frank Darabont's adaptation for The Walking Dead was a huge addition to this, based off of the Romero style. For so many, this was one of the first films that they got to see that had fully graphic, brutal deaths, as well as an ending that didn't go the way they expected it to. It was seeing your hero beaten down, watching everyone else fail, falter, die, get pulled out into the woods, and eaten and consumed. And that sort of hopelessness and everything was entirely different to storytelling. We talked about the value of bad endings with The Mist last week, and I think that this one actually might have one that's a lot more unexpected. Nobody expected that they were just going to shoot him inside the house. It was brutal. I remember whenever I watched this being absolutely shocked that that's how it ended. Night of the Living Dead just holds up. It really is worth seeing. You can actually just Google Night of the Living Dead and it'll put it on YouTube. You can watch the whole film. I would suggest going and buying the Blu-ray version just because they have remastered it. But seriously, Night of the Living Dead is awesome to go back and look at. Just getting into the history of horror in such a way, in such an important movie, is really worth your time if you are a horror fan, especially because it's so accessible. Thank you all for watching. I greatly appreciate it. Tell me below if there's anything that you noticed about this movie, any facts you like about it, or what sort of impact this had on your life. I know that the first thing I ever wrote, the first novel-length content, was actually a zombie book set up kind of like this. They were somewhat faster zombies, although these zombies are a bit more intelligent, and it's kind of interesting seeing the differences there. But yeah, I really, really hope that you guys can take a moment to go enjoy this. If you actually enjoyed this video, though, go ahead and give us a thumbs up, give us a like, give us a tweet, anything like that. And if you really like to check out our Patreon, patreon.com/humanechoes. For $2 a month, you can get postcards. $5, you get a bunch of pins, all sorts of other cool stuff. And remember that the way you make art thrive is by supporting it. I hope you guys have an excellent day, and we will see you in 2 weeks with more 5 Facts.